Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the closing ceremonies for the 31st World Individual Debating and Public Speaking Championships. My name is Riva Jangra, and I'm a grade 11 student here at Branksome Hall, as well as the co-head of the Debating Society here at Branksome. I would now like to read the acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which Branksome operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and go to school on this land. I will now invite the members of the Branksome Hall Choir, accompanied by vocal music teacher Miss Nancy Olfert, to lead us in singing our national anthem. Please rise. Please be seated. It's now my pleasure to welcome Branksome Hall Principal Karen Jurovich to the podium.
Thank you, Riva, for those words of welcome, and a special thank you to the choir under the direction of Nancy Olfert. Good evening to our special guest tonight, Minister Chrystia Freeland, to our World's delegates and coaches, our students, faculty, staff, parents, alumni, honored guests, including Salma Zahid, Liberal MP for Scarborough Centre, and Khalid Rashid, PC MPP for Mississauga East, Cooksville. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the closing ceremony of the 31st World Individual Debating and Public Speaking Championships. World's delegates, it has been quite a week, hasn't it? From arriving in Toronto and meeting all the other delegates, to exploring our city and Niagara Falls, participating in world-class debates, and delivering impressive speeches. We at Branksome Hall have been so honored to host you. As the first Canadian school in the history of the championships to do so, this has been a proud and defining moment for our school. As you know, debating and public speaking have long been an important part of school life at Branksome Hall, and we have been thrilled to host such a prestigious and well-respected competition at our school. I am sure you're eager to learn about this year's winners and the outcome of the grand finals, which took place this afternoon at the University of Toronto's Hart House. Our delegates, well, I think they're in suspense just a little bit longer, as these results will be announced at our gala dinner taking place immediately after this closing ceremony. I would now like to take this opportunity to personally congratulate each one of you. Your talent, your hard work, resilience, and this community spirit that you have shown over the past week. We have seen your skills in action in debating, impromptu speaking, interpretive reading, as well as persuasive and after-dinner speaking. I hope that you have made wonderful memories here. I know that this week has been a highlight of my time as principal of Branksome Hall, and I thank you for that. As you can see in our materials for this year's World's Championships, a logo was created especially for this event, and its design was inspired by the Indigenous talking circle. Traditionally, Indigenous peoples have gathered in the circle, which holds significance as it represents a form of engagement for the community to address issues of both conflict and celebration. The talking circle is depicted in our world's logo to symbolize the coming together of participants as united equals as they discuss the important topics and issues. The red maple in the logo represents our nation's role as host and as one of the many nations represented at this global gathering. This evening, we are delighted to have with us the Honorable Chrystia Freeland, Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Member of Parliament for University Rosedale. She is the most fitting speaker to close the World Debating and Public Speaking Championships as our 2019 Rachel Phillips-Balash Speaker. This speaker series was created in 1998 to honor Rachel Phillips-Balash, my predecessor, and the 6th principal of Branksome Hall. Each year, an outstanding female leader is invited to spark a conversation on a range of topics relevant to young women. We have welcomed some truly extraordinary speakers since launching this series, including Gloria Steinem, Carol Dweck, Ariana Huffington, the President of Latvia, Dr. Vaira Vice-Freiberga, Senator Nancy Ruth, Carol Gilligan, and many more. As an all-girls international baccalaureate school, Branksome has a unique contribution to make to these conversations on women and leadership. Our mission is to nurture young women with the skills and the drive to shape a better world. We live in an age when the call for gender and greater gender equality, inclusion, and diversity is growing more urgent every day. As we witness in parliaments around the globe, civil debate, the principle of free and equitable public dialogue, is the cornerstone of democracy. The ability to respectfully disagree, particularly on challenging and contentious issues, is a vital skill for young people to learn in order to engage in a democratic society. We could not have found a better person to close the World Debating and Public Speaking Championships and to serve as our 2019 Rachel Phillips-Balash Speaker than one of our country's leading parliamentarians who in 2018 was named Diplomat of the Year by Foreign Policy. An esteemed journalist and author, Minister Freeland was born in Peace River, Alberta. She received her undergraduate degree from Harvard University and, as a Rhodes Scholar, continued her studies at Oxford University. She has worked as a Ukraine-based journalist and Eastern European correspondent, a news editor and bureau chief. She is an award-winning author and a proud mother of 3. First elected as Member of Parliament for Toronto Centre in 2013, she went on to serve as Canada's Minister of International Trade from 2015 to 2017, before serving in her current role as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. A recent article describes this latest role as her dream job, and through it, she has solidified her reputation as a principled and progressive feminist leader here in Canada and on the world stage. Please join me in welcoming the Honourable Chrystia Freeland.
I'm a little bit shorter than Karen, so I needed a step. Thank you very much, Karen, for that generous welcome. Thank you very much, Riva, for that introduction, including the very beautiful land acknowledgement. And let me just join you in acknowledging that we're here on the territory of the most recently of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, and I think we're all very fortunate to be able to live here. I also want to say to all of the young people who are here, as Karen said, I am a mother of 3. 2 of them are teenagers. And the conclusion I draw from having an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old in the house is you guys are so much smarter than we are. You are so much harder working. And whenever I sort of despair about the state of the world, which is reasonably often, I truly take comfort from observing my daughters and their friends and a room full of young people like you. And I really feel if we can just keep the world together until you guys take over, everything's going to be fine. So I really respect and honor all the tremendous work all of you have been doing, all the work you've been doing over the past week. When I learned that you wouldn't find out who won until after I was finished talking, I thought maybe the most popular thing I could do is say, thanks, we're done. And I'm really sorry to keep you all on tenterhooks, and I'm grateful for your patience. And Salma and Khalid, it's very nice that you are here too. Ça me fait un très, très grand plaisir d'être ici parmi vous ce soir. Comme Karen a dit, je ne suis pas seulement la ministre des Affaires étrangères, je suis premièrement la députée de l'Université Rosedale. Alors, vous vous trouvez chez moi ce soir. I am here not only as your foreign minister for the Canadians, but first and foremost as the Member of Parliament for University Rosedale. And so I want to say, first of all, to my constituents, it's great to see you tonight. To all the Canadians here, I want to say it is such a privilege to serve you as your foreign minister. And to all the visitors from around the world, I'm sorry the weather hasn't been the best. It's generally not our strongest suit as a country. But I really hope you have had a wonderful week here in the best riding in the country. And I'm allowed to say this, the best country in the world. a place where we really believe our diversity is our strength, a place that really believes so strongly in the open society, in being open to ideas. You as debaters would understand that. Being open to people, open to immigration, open to trade. I think those are some fundamental things about Canada, and I hope those of you visiting our great country have had a chance to experience and enjoy that. So I'm going to make a few opening comments, and then I'm going to sit down, and you guys are going to ask me questions. And I was thinking about what to talk about, and I thought that I would try to share with you for a few moments what I think are the biggest challenges in the world right now. What I am trying to grapple with as foreign minister, what I think we're trying to grapple with as a country. And I think the challenges are really serious. I feel that today, the rules-based international order and the very idea of liberal democracy are under greater threat than they have been, certainly at any time in my lifetime, and I would argue than they have been at any time since the Second World War. So that's a serious thing. I think that part of the threat is one that was anticipated by people who thought about this kind of thing for a long time. And not even so much threat, it's challenge. I think for a long time there has been awareness that this rules-based international order, all of those post-World War II institutions, the UN, NATO, the WTO, the IMF and Bretton Woods institutions, all of those institutions were essentially transatlantic institutions plus Japan. And I think there was an awareness that as the rest of the world got richer, and that's a wonderful thing for all of us, we were going to need to find ways to open those institutions up even more to the rest of the world, chiefly China, but not only China. And I think that's something we've been thinking about and grappling with for a while. But I think more recently, another challenge has emerged, and it's one that not very many of us expected. And that is that probably the single biggest challenge, the sort of most urgent and really most angry questions about liberal democracy, about multilateralism, about the rules-based international order, are being asked from inside some of the world's leading industrialized Western democracies, including our own country. And I think that's a surprise to a lot of people, because we are the countries, after all, who have been both the creators of this liberal order and also its chief beneficiaries. Why is this happening? You know, what's going on? The post-war order actually, by any kind of metric, has been pretty great for Canada and pretty great for the countries of the Transatlantic Alliance and Japan, for sure. I think it's been great for the world. My really strong conviction about why these questions are being asked has to do not so much with international challenges. It has to do with what's happening inside our own societies. And the reality is, over the past 2 decades, maybe the past 3 decades, what we've seen across the Western industrialized world is a hollowing out of the middle class. It's actually been a little less bad in Canada than in other places, but it's happened here too. And I think we are reaping the political consequences of that. You know, when people live in a world where they're not confident that their children will have any opportunities at all, let alone better opportunities than the ones that they enjoyed, where people who've worked hard all their lives are not confident they will have a comfortable retirement, where families with young children are maybe reluctant to start a family or really struggling to do that. Those are societies where people get really mad. And when people get mad and frustrated, it is very easy for politicians, whose job, after all, is to kind of stir up public sentiment, to take that frustration and to try to shape it into something that has a target. And the most convenient target is always on the outside. The most convenient target is your foreign partners, especially your trading partners. The most convenient target is immigrants or people who don't look like you. And I think, broadly speaking, that is what we are seeing happening in a lot of countries in the world right now. And to my mind, it is incredibly dangerous. It's actually not only the chief domestic challenge, I think, in the Western industrialized world, but it has become the chief foreign policy challenge. So what do we do about it? Our government has really been focused on this issue, this question of what can we do to support the middle class and people who want to become part of the middle class. I would say on economic policy has been the central goal. And we've done some things to achieve it. You know, I am really, really proud of the Canada Child Benefit, which has lifted more than 300,000 children out of poverty. There was recently some really positive data about pure poverty. 825,000 Canadians have been lifted out of poverty. And if you want to understand how remarkable it is that that has happened, that's been since 2015, read a recent column by David Brooks about it. He doesn't work for the Government of Canada, although he did go to high school in Toronto, little known fact, but I think it's helped to shape his worldview. And he pointed out in that column that a lot of governments talk about how important it is to lift people out of poverty, but that somehow Canada has managed to start getting that right. In our recent budget, we introduced some new elements to make things easier for the brilliant young people who are gathered here, at least for the Canadian ones, to make your student loans cheaper and to give you a little more time before you have to start paying them off. And as someone who remembers with extreme pain the first day I had to start paying off my student loans, it was worth it. Don't be scared about taking them out. I was really, really glad that we were able to do that. So I really feel that in confronting this challenge, of the threat to liberal democracy, our first job is to clean our own house and to do everything we can to make liberal democracy really, really solid in Canada. That's not chiefly my job, though, because I am foreign minister. My job is dealing with the consequences of this really powerful challenge to the notion of liberal democracy on the international arena. And it's a serious challenge. I would say this is an age when authoritarianism is resurgent and quite self-confident, when the notion of protectionism has more currency than ever before, when a sort of beggar thy neighbor approach, the kind that contributed hugely to the Great Depression, is once again astonishingly prevalent. But I think it is very important not to despair. I don't want to leave you guys thinking that we have given up. My feeling is, instead of cursing the darkness, what you have to do is light a candle. And that is what Canada has been doing really energetically around the world. One of the approaches we've taken, I would say maybe the core approach has been to diagnose this issue, this problem, and to speak very frankly about it. To say, yeah, liberal democracy is being challenged, and we are going to speak up proudly and boldly in its support. But we also have to do stuff. And when it comes to that aspect of the challenge, one of the things that we have been working on, I would say with increasing traction, has been to look for groups of like-minded countries on specific issues and to work together with those countries to try to achieve success in those areas. It is great and it is important for Canada to speak up, and we will never shirk the responsibility to speak up in our own name. And Canada's not small, right? I think we think of ourselves as small because of our geography, but we're the world's 10th largest economy. However, we are not one of the superpowers. And so it is simply the case that we are more effective when we can find partners in our efforts. And some examples of that are the fact that even after the US withdrawal, we have moved ahead with the Paris Accords. Our government is moving ahead with putting a price on pollution as part of our commitment there. Another example is the CPTPP, our trade agreement with the Asia Pacific. And again there, this painstakingly negotiated agreement had its single biggest member, the US, withdraw. I think there were a lot of questions about whether the remaining members, would we have it in ourselves to move ahead? And we have. And that agreement has now entered into force for Canada. And that is a really big deal and a huge advantage for Canadian exporters, particularly with the opening up of the Japanese market. Another issue is the Rohingya. The genocide against the Rohingya and the fact that more than 1 million have had to flee chiefly to Bangladesh, I think history is going to judge as one of the real atrocities of our time. And Canada has been at the forefront both of seeking accountability for those who have committed these atrocious crimes, including the use of rape as a weapon of war, and also at providing support for the Rohingya, for the people of Bangladesh, who are doing a tremendous job in supporting them. And actually, I was invited last year to speak to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, a group of Islamic countries, because of the leading role that Canada is playing in supporting the Rohingya. And then maybe most recently, and this is top of mind for me, because believe it or not, I was in Santiago when I was in a plane heading back from Santiago when the sun rose this morning. And I was in Santiago for a meeting of the Lima Group. And this is a group of countries in our hemisphere which is working to restore democracy, constitutional order, and human rights for the people of Venezuela. The meeting in Santiago was the 12th ministerial level meeting of the Lima Group, so we've been at it for a long time. And I have to say, our hemispheric partners really appreciate Canada's participation there. They see that as really, really crucial. And so do the Europeans, who have come out and recognized Juan Guaido as interim president of Venezuela, I think in part because of the Canadian participation and because they trust us. So those are some of the things that we are doing around the world. I'm happy to take questions about it. And about other issues, too. I didn't want to talk about the whole world. That would take too long. And sort of in closing, I just want to say 2 more things. One is I have talked about the importance of, active government policy to support our middle class, to ensure that we have the sort of social foundation for support for liberal democracy and for support for the open society. And I really believe that it starts there. But we also have to consciously stand up for and fight for democracy in our own country. We have an election coming up in the fall, you may have heard. And the experience of our G7 partners, the experience of our NATO partners, and indeed some of our own most recent experience strongly suggests that our country will be targets of various forms of malign interference. The government is taking various steps to try to protect us against that. But the single most effective step we can take is to just all be very aware. We spent a lot of time talking with the Baltic states. I was interested that you had the president of Latvia here, who is a Canadian. She's a Canadian Latvian. We talk a lot with the Latvians, the Estonians, the Lithuanians, And through our election monitoring effort in Ukraine, we've been talking a lot with the Ukrainians. And these countries are kind of the laboratories of Russian interference. And we've said to them, what's the answer? How do we protect ourselves? And the answer I have had from them time and time again is the best vaccine is an aware citizenry. If Canadians are alert, are thoughtful about defending their democracy, then you guys will be okay no matter what anybody from the outside throws at you. And one of the most important defenses of our democracy is to remember how valuable democracy is and to be very wary of a kind of creeping cynicism. My own theory about malign interference from authoritarian regimes in democracies is it's not usually about trying to get one leader or another to win. What it is mostly about is making us, the people of democracies, doubt whether democracy is that great. It's about making us really cynical. As Karen said, I started my professional life as a reporter in what was actually still the Soviet Union. My kids can't believe I'm that old, but I am. And one of the well-known and very effective propaganda techniques of the Soviet Union was something called whataboutism. So whenever there was a criticism made of the Soviet Union, the question asked by the Soviets was, well, what about, if it's Canada, what about your treatment of Indigenous people? What about the fact that you have poverty? What about the fact you don't have pharmacare, or whatever? The idea being that because our societies are imperfect, we have no right to challenge the truly gross failings of the dictatorships of the world, and no right to stand up for our own values. Now, you guys are all brilliant debaters. You will understand much better than I can how to make the argument about why that is really wrong. But I urge you to hone those arguments because we're really going to need them. And then just finally in closing, Karen mentioned the importance of for the identity of Branksome, where we are, as being a school for girls and young women. And so I wanted to mention to you guys one very specific policy, it's not even proposal, policy action, which I have undertaken in my department based on talking to some high school students in Toronto, actually at the Rosedale School of the Arts. I was there the end of last summer, and it was right in the heat of the NAFTA negotiations, and there were a lot of questions about NAFTA, but the students also sort of made a list of proposals for me. And one of their top proposals from the young women in the group was tampons and sanitary napkins need to be free in our bathrooms. And they said that this was a campaign that they were undertaking in their school, and they asked me to take it on for the part of the government of Canada I'm responsible for. And I thought it was an excellent idea. So I have instructed, I went back to Ottawa and I instructed my deputy minister that this is what we needed to do inside the department and eventually inside all of our embassies. So I'm going to challenge all the young people here. If you guys give me some truly actionable proposals, then the next time I'm talking in a high school, I'll tell them about the great ideas I got at Branksome and how we acted on them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister Freeland, for those really interesting insights. That was amazing, so thank you. So good evening, everyone. My name is Eve Kavanaugh. I'm a grade 12 student here at Branksome Hall, and I'm the co-head of the Debating Society. I'm pleased to be your moderator tonight. First, I have a few notes about how we will proceed. You will notice that there are 5 microphones set up in the aisles. If you have a question, please line up behind the microphone, and I will call upon you if it's your turn. If you would like to, I would like to mention that we would like to ensure that each person will only ask one question each, just to make sure that it is also, in fact, a question, and also to please keep it brief so that we can make sure that everybody has enough time to ask their question. And while we do welcome challenging questions, we also encourage everybody to keep things civil, and also to keep a very direct question as well.
I suspect it won't be worse than the House of Commons, so don't worry too much.
So I actually would like to start off with a question of my own. So you talked a lot about how domestic policies and domestic affairs can influence a country's foreign affairs. I'm wondering, in your own role as foreign minister, do you notice that your dealings with foreign affairs can also influence other countries' choices in handling their own domestic affairs? And if that is true, how do you decide how to deal with that? And how do you decide how to approach foreign affairs with the understanding that it may influence a country's domestic policies?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think our foreign policy and the example of our domestic policies in the world certainly has an influence. I think it actually has a far greater influence than we as Canadians really appreciate. You know, one of the things that I have really learned from being foreign minister is the stereotype of Canadians as being humble and always saying sorry. I think it's a nice national trait. I try to encourage my children to behave that way. But it's really true. And I think we really underestimate our weight in the world. I think Canada has a very powerful influence both as a player, but also as a role model. And to give you a few examples, I think our feminist foreign policy and our domestic feminist policies have been really inspiring for a lot of countries. And it ranges from the fact that we have noticed countries have been sending women ambassadors to Canada. And I can just kind of imagine the conversation in capitals. They're like, oh, it's the Canadians. They're really into that feminist stuff. You know, let's look for a great woman to be ambassador there. And it has a real impact and a really positive impact. We've noticed other countries now coming out and naming gender-balanced cabinets and explicitly referring to the Canadian example as something which is inspiring them. An initiative that we are leading, which may sound kind of detailed and wonkish, but I think has the potential to be really transformative, is something called the Elsi Initiative. And this is a project to increase the number of women in peacekeeping. In UN peacekeeping. That is really important for a number of reasons. The worst of them is, as you guys will know, UN peacekeepers have been implicated in some terrible sexual abuse and exploitation issues. And to my mind, there are few things more horrible than that someone who is there to keep the peace in your neighborhood actually exploits you. It tends to be the case that when you have a lot of women in the ranks, that doesn't happen. There's also a lot of research showing that communities that have women in uniform coming in they're less threatened, and they tell the truth more. And that applies to women and children in the communities, but also to men. So there has been huge take-up at the UN among our partners to have more women in peacekeeping. But until Canada came in with a very practical plan to do it, no one was actually doing it. So we have chipped in $15 million for some practical things. And when I say practical, I mean very practical. Like, they discovered one reason they didn't have women in peacekeeping was they didn't have bathrooms for the women. And so for the women peacekeepers, that was kind of a problem. So Canada has now chipped in $15 million, but now we have the UK, the Netherlands, and Finland have also made financial commitments. And, it's really gathering steam. I could go on and on, but I'm going to stop.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I will remind people just to line up behind the microphones when you want to ask a question. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to say one more thing, actually, because this is very important. A lot of countries right now are wondering whether it's actually possible to be a diverse society. And I think some countries are sort of falling into an internal rhetoric where they just sort of say, well, that was a good idea, but it just doesn't work. People with different religions, different cultural backgrounds, different skin colors, they just can't live successfully together. That's really something that you're starting to hear. I feel like looking at the Branksome choir, that was a pretty good demonstration that in Canada, it's just not the case. And one of the things that I think is so powerful about the Canadian example in the world today is to say, it's really true that our diversity is our strength. And actually, we like it that way. It sort of works. And in a world where a lot of countries, even formerly liberal people, are kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying that's just not possible, the Canadian example is very powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. This is a question that I know has been on people's minds quite a bit, both in relation to what has been happening.
And could I just ask, do you mind telling me your name and what
Not at
school
all.
you're from and stuff?
I'm Emerson Hurley from Melbourne, Australia.
Okay.
I know this question has been in a lot of people's minds, both in relation to what has been happening, say, in Syria and what may yet happen in Venezuela. But in your view, what is the role of military intervention in foreign policy, both in terms of the actions of a single state or an alliance or indeed the international community?
Okay, that is an excellent question, and I spent most of, or maybe half of yesterday in Santiago debating that. On Venezuela, and those of you who are wonkish, which I guess is probably most of you, you can look up the Lima Group statement. We very explicitly said that the countries of the Lima Group support a peaceful solution and a domestic solution, a domestic in Venezuela solution to the crisis in Venezuela, and that we oppose outside military interference. So that was a very clear statement. That is very much Canada's position. And, you know, in my own experience as a reporter, one of the things that I have seen is the most durable democratic transitions are transitions where a country has mustered the political will at home to accomplish that transition. That is not in any way to minimize how hard it is and the tremendous obstacles that the people of Venezuela face. But at the end of the day, it is up to them. Now, what we as the international community can do, what the Lima Group has done, is to give them all the international support we can. Canada has now, we announced on Monday an additional round of sanctions. We have now sanctioned more than 100 leaders of the Maduro regime. We're encouraging other countries to do that too. We've been working with our partners around the world. More than 50 countries around the world have now recognized Juan Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela. So we are providing the strongest possible international support for the restoration of the legitimate constitutional order in Venezuela. And at the end of the day, we really feel the people of Venezuela are going to need to finish the job themselves.
Thank you. I hope the rest of the world agrees.
Thank you. And yes, if everybody would just give their name and also where they're from when they ask their question, that would be great. So I'm having trouble seeing, but if there's a person lined up at that microphone over there, you can go ahead.
Hi there. My name's Emily. I'm a student at the University of Toronto. As a student studying political science and public policy, studying political science and public policy, I'm learning a lot about the role of women in politics and the importance and the different perspectives that women can bring. I'm wondering, as a strong woman in politics yourself, If there's any advice that you could perhaps give aspiring politicians, or perhaps talk about some of the challenges that you face in your role in Canada, but also in the international stage. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that question. It has been much on my mind lately. And I will say a couple of things about it. I mean, first of all, to your question was sort of, what advice do I have to you, to other, young women here who want to become politicians? And I would have a few pieces of concrete advice. The first thing is, just go for it. You will not do it unless you just start doing it. The second piece of advice, and this is sort of personal to me, and other people have different paths, but I have found that it's been very useful for me to actually have something that I was an expert in, to have a real area of hard-won, serious knowledge. An issue can be for women to get taken seriously. And I think you guys, having seen me here on stage, will realize I am not that physically intimidating, and my voice is on the high side. And I have found that if you really know a lot about something, that can be really, really helpful. And then maybe the final thing I would say is find people in your life who support you. That some of those people, I think, will often be your female colleagues. Certainly for me, some of my strongest allies in cabinet are many of the other women. But it doesn't only have to be those. I would say someone who's been very important in my life, encouraging me all the time, has been my dad. Another person is a Branksome supporter, Jeff Beattie, who was my boss and headhunted me many, many years ago, and has been really a steadfast supporter. Another one is my husband. So having people around you who kind of pick you up when you stumble and who have real faith in you is also really important. I think it's important for men as well as women, but maybe more important for women because maybe even today, and by the way, I think for young women in Canada, I'm not saying you're operating on a level playing field. It's still not level, but it is better than it has been ever in Canadian history. And I would probably argue that as women, Canadian women are in a better position than women in any society in any time have been. So it's a pretty great time. And, nonetheless, I think girls probably grow up with a little less confidence than boys for whatever reason. And so having people around you who support you, I think, is really important.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll have this person over here in this last aisle.
Hi, Eve. Hi, Chrystia. I'm Liz. So I was listening to CBC the other day, and they made a comment about authoritarian populism and the rise of authoritarian populism, and that got me a little nervous. So I was just wondering how you think this apparent rise in authoritarian populism will affect our, liberal democracy, and kind of how we as a country can combat this rise.
Okay, well, that's a great question, and that's kind of what I addressed my remarks to. I think that the rise of authoritarianism and the rise in democracies of populist movements who are sort of authoritarianly inclined is one of the biggest dangers in our world today. And, the first half of the 20th century offers some very terrifying lessons in where that can take countries and the world. And in terms of what to do about it, I really think, the domestic economic policies I talked about, I think are really, really important. If we can be sure that Canadians are confident about their lives, their families' life, and confident about their futures, that is going to give us a really strong insurance policy against authoritarian populism happening here. And then I think we just have to work harder as citizens, and be very alert, be very aware, fight cynicism about democracy, and also I think realize that there's an inherent weakness in democracy, and that is that democracies, we wear all of our flaws and our scars on our sleeve. Our government, any Canadian government, for 1 hour a day when the House is in session, is subject to questions of the hardest and worst and meanest that the opposition can come up with about why the government is bad. I still remember the first time my kids came to question period, and my middle daughter, I think she was maybe 12 at the time, maybe younger, and she said afterwards, "I know that you're trying so hard, but they make it seem as if you're so bad." And that's kind of the point. But, compared to an authoritarian regime that controls the information about itself, that can look kind of weak. I don't think it is. I think that open debate is one of our greatest strengths. But we all have to be smart about that.
That's a really nice message. We'll have this person right across here. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Ben. I'm from Central Memorial High School in Calgary. So I just want to ask, how can we promote our allies to follow our example of starting to discuss reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, as brief as it is?
As brief as what is?
Are starting to discuss reconciliation with our Indigenous peoples.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say, hi, Ben. It's nice that there's another Albertan here. I am the MP for University Rosedale, but I never forget my Alberta roots. Look, I was very glad, by the way, Karen, to see that logo. I was very glad, Riva, to hear the land acknowledgement. We speak a lot about human rights around the world. And when I do that, I make a point of prefacing my remarks by saying, look, we know we're not perfect in Canada either, and one of our most glaring imperfections is our relationship with the Indigenous people in Canada. I think, in a way, this is kind of the work of, my generation, but maybe even more your guys' generation. I think the work has really only begun. And I think we also need to be really mindful that there are no easy answers. And the way to get the work done is really to start doing the work, to start ensuring that we are including a conversation with Indigenous people in everything we do. And I'll give you 2 examples of something that I've been trying to do. In our new NAFTA, we actually have the strongest language of Indigenous rights in any trade agreement Canada has ever negotiated. We think it could be the strongest language in any trade agreement ever. There may be one between New Zealand and Taiwan that's better. So that's kind of a big deal, and also astonishing given who our counterparties were. And we achieved that just because we tried really hard. And it actually involved a totally new mindset. Our trade negotiators had never thought about including Indigenous rights in a trade agreement, and they had to set up a whole new team that had to set up a whole new set of conversations. It's a small step, but it's a step in the right direction. And, that's just what we all need to be doing. I think having the land acknowledgement here at the beginning of our conversation was really important for all of us. And I'm glad also that since we have guests from outside Canada, you heard that too. So that's a partial answer. It's a very big question and an important one.
Thank you.
Great. And how about this person here? Yes, you.
Over here. Just right over here. Hello. First of all,
Sorry, we're
thank you so much
blinded
for joining
here.
us this evening, Minister Freeland. It's really been a real pleasure to hear you speak. My name's Owen Brown. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm a student at St. John's Ravens Court School. And I just wanted to ask you, as a teenager, I'm quite attached to my phone and to social media. I'm sure you may have experienced that with your own children in some capacity. And I heard you mention how you may think that our election coming up in the fall could be subject to foreign interference. Do you think, as we saw to an extent in the United States, that social media and the internet could be leveraged against Canadian democracy?
Thank you for the question, Owen, and also great to have someone from Winnipeg here. I'll tell you guys just a quick personal thing, which is the way that my life actually functions. Since I live in Toronto, I live like less than a kilometer away from here, but Ottawa is where Parliament is, and I have to be in other countries a lot. I have two aunts, two of my mother's sisters, who divide the time that the House is in session and come live with me in Toronto. One of them lives in Edmonton, and the other one lives in Winnipeg. So Winnipeg is very close to my heart and important to the functioning of my life. On social media, I think that is absolutely a threat. I think it's almost certain that there will be attempts to undermine our democracy using social media. I think there probably have been some already. And I think, there are maybe sort of three responses. One is, as a government, we've put some structures in place to help us deal with threats, including, I think very importantly, setting up a group of people who are outside politics, who will be able to let Canadians know what's going on in the election, who can be kind of independent arbiters. And putting that kind of a structure in place well ahead of the election, I think, is really important because, as we've seen when other countries have tied themselves in knots over this, as you get closer to a vote, believe it or not, people start not fully believing every single word a politician says. I know that's kind of shocking, but so having that in place is really important. As I said, I think an aware citizenry, it's the single most important thing, and for people just to be thoughtful about what you're reading everywhere. Think about what the source is. Before you share something on social media, take a look at who wrote it and what their sources are. As a former journalist, I'm very aware of how important sourcing is and how hard it is. I think kind of as citizens, in the age of social media, we all need to become editors ourselves and take that responsibility. But I think the third thing, Owen, is I do think the time has come for us to think very hard about what the responsibilities of social media companies, and I would say of technology platforms, are. When I was an editor, there were many days when I was either duty editor of the Globe and Mail or duty editor of the Financial Times. And that meant that you had to sign off every single page. And you were personally responsible for every article on that page. You were responsible for the ads. And I remember one of my editors, a wonderful guy, Richard Lambert, a legendary editor of the FT, explaining to me the cartoons were where you could often get the most tripped up. And he said, people don't pay attention, but I got sued over one of them, so be really careful. And he said, when in doubt, just don't run it. And so, as someone who has been an editor, I know what it's like to take that responsibility. I know that it's possible. By the way, the technology platforms are now benefiting from most of the advertising that used to go to traditional media companies. They can afford to do this if they want to, or if laws require them to. So I think the time has come to have some very serious conversations about that. And that is something that I think is being discussed, not only by us here in Canada, but we're talking about it with our closest allies. I was week and a half ago at the G7 foreign ministers meeting in France, and one of the issues we discussed was precisely that.
Thank you.
Great. And who's here at this microphone? What's your question?
Good evening, Honourable Minister. Thank you for gracing us with your presence tonight. My name is Kellen Dedder. I attend Bishop's College in Cape Town. And my question is, what is your department doing to aid efforts against climate change and the environmental polycrisis, and to get other countries on board with environmentalism and promoting it? And how high is this on your priorities?
Well, thank you very much, Kalandetta, and thank you for being here with us in Canada. Again, to you specifically, I kind of want to apologize again for the weather. If you were to stick around for a couple weeks, it really does become totally beautiful here. Climate change is a real priority for our government, and we have now moved from talking about it to acting on it. So our government has put a price on pollution on all people in Canada. We think that's the right approach because it's the economically smart approach. It's letting the market determine how we are all going to use fewer fossil fuels. But I have to say, and the Canadians here may sort of chuckle ruefully, it is not a politically self-evident thing to all Canadians. I think that it is one of the most contested issues in the country right now. And, you know, speaking for myself, I come from a small town, from a really rural background, and I can understand how the challenges look different. If you live in downtown Toronto, I rode my bike here. I don't own a car. I don't need to. It's really easy. My dad couldn't survive without having a pickup. So the challenges are different for people across the country, but I think we as Canadians understand that climate change is a reality. I think we understand we have a responsibility to the younger generation who is here to do something about it. I think we understand that we can only be effective if we work together with the whole world. That's why I mentioned the Paris Accords as a really important example of multilateralism. And since you're from Cape Town, I want to mention one other thing which I'm very mindful of as foreign minister. And that is that a sort of paradoxically horrible reality is that the most devastating impact of climate change is being felt by people in countries who have contributed the least to climate change. It's true of many countries in Africa. It's also true of many small island states in the Caribbean, in the South Pacific. And I think for those of us who live in a rich, industrialized democracy that has contributed a lot to it, it sort of imposes a further moral responsibility to act.
And we'll have one more from this far side over here. Yes.
Our names are Abby and Iris, and we live in Toronto, and we also happen to attend Branksome Hall as 5th graders.
Excellent.
And our question is, what inspired you to get into politics?
Okay, well, it's a little bit of a long story, but I'll try to make it short. The very specific story is our future Prime Minister, who at the time was the leader of the Liberal Party, asked me to run. And I initially, and a number of times, told him that I couldn't do it. And the reason for that is at the time I was a journalist, I was living in New York, I had 3 children, I had a job in New York, my husband had a job in New York, my children, the eldest of whom was a year older than you guys, my eldest was in grade 6, they all loved their schools and their friends, and my kids basically said to me, "No way are we moving." And that maybe that was wrong of me to take their objections so seriously, but they're a very persuasive threesome. And at the end of the day, what really persuaded me was probably two people. One was the future Prime Minister himself, and he can be quite irresistible when he really believes in something and wants to achieve it. And he sort of said, it's your duty. But also what he said that I really made a huge impact on me is, these were very difficult conversations, and it was hard to say no. And finally, I just said, look, I would love to do it, but my kids won't let me. And I thought, if nothing else, it would make him consider me too flaky to be worth trying to persuade anymore. And to my astonishment, he took that very seriously. And he told me about a time in his life when his father was making a big decision, and he had been the age of my eldest daughter, and the conversations he had had with his father and so on. And just the fact he took that so seriously, it made a real impact on me. And then the second person who was very central in persuading me, I talked to you guys earlier about how you need people who support you, was actually my dad. And my dad is a farmer in northern Alberta. This is not a place where you find a lot of liberals. But my dad has always been a Justin Trudeau fan, back from before he was leader of the Liberal Party. And I talked to my dad a lot, and I asked his advice. And finally, at the end, my dad said to me, Canada has given you a lot. And that is really true. Karen was nice enough to talk about the great schools I went to. And it started with going to an IB high school in Edmonton. One of the first, I'm old, I'm 50. So I went to an IB public high school in Edmonton. It was one of the first IB schools in the country, and that was because we had great public schools in Edmonton in those days. And then I went to Harvard, and I went to Harvard very much supported by Province of Alberta and Government of Canada scholarships. They really made my life possible. And my dad reminded me of all of this, and he said, I don't know if you'll win your nomination. I don't know if you'll get elected. I don't know if Justin will become Prime Minister. But I think there's a real chance, and you are being asked to help him, and you have a duty to your country to do it. And then my dad said, also, if you don't do it, you won't be my daughter anymore. So I don't use that argument with my own children, but my dad is from an older, kind of tougher generation. And
Awesome.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, we only have time for one more question. So if you would go ahead.
Hi, I'm Maddie Ritter. I'm also from Winnipeg, and I go to the same school as Owen did. My question is...
Yay, the peg.
Yes.
That's great.
What type of constraints does something like partisanship have on the type of work that you do, and what are potential solutions that you see to that?
So I actually don't see partisanship, if by that you mean the fact that we are organized into political parties, as a problem. I think that it is a key feature of how a parliamentary democracy works. I remember when I was a reporter and I wrote columns sometimes and sort of, decrying partisanship, and if only, all smart, like-minded people could get together, we could kind of together find good solutions without this mean conflict of partisanship. But that's kind of called a technocratic dictatorship. At the end of the day, we need to have some arena where we have really different approaches to how we solve issues and different approaches to how we run our country, elaborated, and have a real clash of those ideas, as you guys have had in your debates. I had a question on climate change. You guys know that's an area where there is a real debate in our country, and there are real points of view on both sides, maybe on three sides, right? If someone from the NDP were here, they would argue that our government isn't doing enough. And I think in a democracy, it is absolutely essential to have structures which allow those ideas to be wrestled with, to be shaped, and then to be brought into the public space for voters to choose between them. And actually one of the things, and it's kind of interesting, one of the very nice things about being foreign minister is I get to have quite open, private conversations with very senior politicians in other countries. Because we can kind of bitch to each other about our problems. It's a safe space. And the foreign ministers of a couple of other countries, actually 3, who are close allies and partners who shall remain nameless, countries that are having a lot of internal problems, have all said to me, and we actually had a supper where this came up and we talked about it, and it was really interesting to me the extent to which they attributed some of the very big struggles their countries were going through to a breakdown of their political parties, to a breakdown of the connection between political parties and voters, and to a breakdown inside the party. So I actually have really come to appreciate the importance of political parties actually as one of the institutions in our democracy. And, it's kind of easy and safe to float 30,000 feet above and to kind of just talk about big ideas and stuff. If you're a reporter or a columnist, to say, oh, if only the idiots on both sides could stop being such idiots and just, put the common good ahead of narrow partisan interest. At the end of the day, we have elections, and one party wins and the other ones don't. And those elections are the principal way that we decide what path our country will take. So I am very proud to be a Liberal. I am a supporter of our party's policies, and I think they're better than the policies of the other parties. That's why I'm a Liberal, and I'm okay with that.
Well, with that, we unfortunately will have to conclude the question portion of the evening. Thank you so much to the audience for such an interesting discussion, and thank you so much to Minister Freeland for so graciously answering all of our questions so personally and in such depth. We do have a small token of our appreciation for being this year's Rachel Balash Speaker.
Thank
This is
you.
for you.
I will carry it with pride, guys. Thank you very much.
All the other delegates have one too.
Okay. Could I just want to say one more thing, Eve, which is to everybody here, are you going to find out the awards now?
Tonight.
How much longer do they have to wait?
At dinner.
Just now they find out?
Oh, I think at dinner.
At dinner.
After this is over. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I just wish everyone really the best of luck. I know that everyone here worked really, really hard. And I hope you also feel, and this is easy to say but hard to really feel, that no matter what the result of the contest, that you've had a really wonderful experience here in Canada and in the best riding in the country, University Rosedale. Thank you very much.
Sorry, before you go, I'll just invite Ms. Weinsbach and Ms. Jervicek for a photo. And then I'll invite Ms. Jervich up to give her closing remarks.
We're going to be okay? I'm just going to say thank you to you. Okay. Do you want me to stay up there or do you want me to go back to my seat? I'll go back to my seat. Okay. And I may, you know what? You want to take your little...
It will be easier
so
for
kind of you. Thank you. All right, thank you. We're almost done here. Good evening. I'm Carrie Weinstock, the Deputy Principal, and I just want to say to world participants, it's so good for us to have just this last time together at the closing ceremony. We've truly come full circle. I can remember your excitement when you first arrived, sat here at the opening ceremony, and tonight we are experiencing the exhilaration of your accomplishments, and we're celebrating your coaches' commitment to your success. Over the past 5 days, I've witnessed moments of skillful debate, humorous after-dinner speaking, engaging interpretive reading, and brilliant impromptu speeches. Equally important, I have seen friendships and partnerships created and connections made as you've collaborated and supported each other through the competition. And in this, you have exemplified the spirit of Worlds, of Branksome Hall, and of our country, Canada. Minister Freeland, as Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, you demonstrate the qualities that we hope this competition instills in students. You are articulate and exhibit grace under pressure. We have watched in awe as over the past 2 years, you have fearlessly advocated for Canadian interests and values in the trade and human rights spheres. You have stepped into your broad portfolio unafraid to boldly confront epic challenges such as renegotiating NAFTA. You have shown us the art of knitting together diplomacy, intuition, brilliance, and optimism. Thank you also for giving our students an example of how one combines the complexities of being a key player on the world stage with managing and enjoying a full family life and getting around the city on a bicycle. We have been privileged this evening to witness firsthand how you carefully listened to our questions, answered them candidly and thoughtfully, and offered advice and wisdom. We will not soon forget what we have learned from you tonight. Thank you for being who you are in the world and for honoring us as this year's Rachel Phillips-Balash Speaker. Let's have another round of applause for the Minister. And finally, I would like to thank John Robinson, the co-founder of Worlds, our patrons and sponsors who are here with us tonight, as well as the entire Branksome community. You all made this week a great success and gave our Worlds participants a truly Canadian welcome. This now concludes our Worlds closing ceremony, and it is my pleasure to invite our guests to exit first. Worlds delegates and coaches, please wait a few minutes before going into the dining hall for that special gala dinner and the results and awards ceremony. Thank you all very much for attending this evening.